Hi everyone, what's the scoop? It's SMA Program Lifecycle Live Week 7, and I'm your host, Sophie Kimball. Today we dive into the complex and politically charged history of the Olympic Games and the current challenges of the 2024 Paris Games. This analysis is from our resident global affairs expert, Greg Treverton, who not only serves as an executive advisor for SMA, but was also a former chair of the National Intelligence Council and is a professor of the practice at Dornsife College at the University of Southern California. Here's what Greg had to say about the current 2024 Paris Olympics. It is intriguing to wonder what Baron Pierre de Coubertin would make of today's version of his creation, the modern Olympic Games, in 1896. He believed the Games could unite nations and promote peace and friendship amongst peoples, bring communities together, stop war, and promote healthy competition free from cheating and discrimination. Alas, on the opening day of the Paris Games, the country suffered arson attacks that the Prime Minister called coordinated and prepared acts of sabotage. The Games are riddled with politics, as nations use them to build international standing, while groups ranging from protesters to terrorists, there's a stage where the whole world is watching. Yet perhaps the good Baron would not be so surprised. The most important thing is not to win, but to take part. The rest of the quote is, "The most important thing in life is not the triumph, but the struggle. The essential thing is not to have conquered, but to have fought well." He also served as president of the International Olympic Committee, the IOC, until 1925, so he lived to see the ravages of World War I intrude big time on his beloved Olympics, causing the cancellation of the 1916 Games. So today's political turmoil would perhaps not shock him. Indeed, one of the two major wars being fought now in the trenches of Ukraine would have eerily reminded him of World War I. I doubt he could have imagined the demise of another of his ideals. Just like the ancient Games, they were strictly amateur affairs, something that is now hard for even us to believe was the case until 1986, when the entire basketball players on Team USA made more than $30 million a year, and some a lot more. Jim Thorpe, one of America's most famous athletes, was stripped of his decathlon and pentathlon gold medals, won in 1912 Stockholm, after it was discovered that he had been paid a pittance for playing semi-professional baseball while he was in college. I hope D. Coubertin would still look most fondly on those Olympic sports where there is little to no money being made and competitors simply love the sport. A vanishing breed now when only boxing is restricted to amateurs and even rowers paid by their countries to row full time. We move on to a section titled Past Politics as Prelude. To be sure, the modern Olympics are hardly a stranger to politics. Probably the most celebrated case in point is the Berlin Games in 1936. Berlin had been awarded the Games before the Nazis came to power, but Adolf Hitler saw them as an enormous propaganda opportunity for his regime and his theory that the Aryans were a superior race. By the time of the Games, protests over the persecution of Jews had already sparked calls for the United States and individual American athletes to boycott the Games. In the end, the Games went on, but Hitler's dreams came to naught when Jesse Owens, the black American sprinter, stunned the world by winning 4 gold medals. At Mexico City in 1968, 2 black American sprinters raised their fist in what was interpreted at the time a black power salute from the winner's podium. Tragically, in 1972 at Munich, Palestinian terrorists infiltrated the Olympic Village, killed 2 Israeli athletes, and took 9 others hostage, who were later killed after a failed rescue attempt by German police. Politics intruded again in a less bloody fashion in 1980, when the United States boycotted the Games in Moscow as part of its response to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan the year before. In return, Russia boycotted the 1984 Games because they were held in Los Angeles. The political tugs on the IOC are plainly visible. On one hand, the good Baron's emphasis on global friendship argues for inclusion, but on the other, he emphasized sportsmanship, which might sometimes argue for exclusion. The tugs are on display in the IOC's handling of doping. The IOC provides half of the funding for the World Anti-Doping Agency, WADA, created in the wake of past scandals like an American athlete's drug-tainted ouster from the 1988 Seoul Olympics and the 1998 Tour de France doping scandal. Yet, the IOC is pulled at by inclusion. On the eve of these Paris Games, it awarded the 2034 Winter Games to Salt Lake City, but did so demanding that the U.S. Olympic leaders pressure the government to rescind an anti-conspiracy law, one aimed at doping, that was passed unanimously in 2020, under which the FBI was investigating allegations of Chinese doping that the WADA had not pursued. In 2016, WADA and the IOC clashed over whether to exclude Russia from the Rio de Janeiro Games over yet another doping scandal. In the end, the IOC prevailed and Russia was permitted in the Games. In 2023, the IOC did ban Russia from participating in Paris because of the war in Ukraine. Instead, it offered a complicated formula under which Russian athletes could participate as individual neutral athletes, AIN in its French acronym, if they had not demonstrated support for the war or had contact with any military or national security agencies. 15 Russians have accorded that status, but dozens more will participate, having acquired new nationalities to get around the sanctions imposed on Russian sports. Our next segment is titled A Tempting Target. After the arson Olympic opening day that affected some 800,000 train travelers, French authorities said that they already thwarted 4 attempted attacks targeting the Games and prevented 1,000 people from attending the Games. Security for the Games is an enormous undertaking, with 45,000 police officers, 10,000 soldiers, 2,000 private security guards, plus 1,000 police reinforcements from 40 different countries. Sadly, we know the July 13 attempt to assassinate former President Donald Trump, that big events in large open settings are hard to police. And those events are what the Olympics offer in spades. Add in the presence of large crowds and intense media attention, and you have all the ingredients for disruptions ranging from political protests to terrorist attacks. We also know that there's no shortage of causes out there, with the war in Gaza heading the lists. Indeed, FBI Director Christopher A. Wray said in an interview that in April that I'm hard-pressed to come up with a time when I've seen so many different threats all elevated all at the same time. The threats were rising before Hamas's October attack, but since then, it's gone to a whole nother level. The most pressing terrorist threat is probably ISIS-K, the group responsible for the terrorist rampage in Moscow last March. But we know most recently from the attack on Trump that lone wolves with obscure causes, or apparently none at all, can do major mayhem or worse. The uncertainty is increased because the politics of the host, France, are in turmoil after 2 elections that produced a right-wing surge followed by a center-left reaction, leaving the shape of the future government in some doubt. Much as Greg hopes, the world will not return to his vision of the Olympics, which would be only amateurs, no countries, flags, or silly costumes. There might be regional qualifying events, but only for convenience. If it turned out that one of the world's fastest sprinters were Jamaican, so be it. Greg would also be tempted to limit the events to ones without judges, only those where the winner would run the fastest, jump the highest, throw the javelin the furthest, and so on. The goal would be to avoid judges and thus arguments about whether their judgments showed favoritism. Here, though, Greg balks at his own vision for the Olympic sport because what he likes best is gymnastics, which depends entirely on the judges. Yet, Greg's vision is now a fantasy, and perhaps more slightly crotchety one at that. And we can at least remember that the Olympics are about the athletes and not the countries or the flags. While camaraderie might be better if the athletes were not separated into nations, there are still friendships to be made, much as de Coubertin's hopes. We cannot avoid the toting up of which country wins the most medals, but we can try to de-emphasize it. For American Olympians, we can hope they fight well, but display the sportsmanship de Coubertin sought. Paris will also be a chance to see the sad pattern of the previous to see if the sad pattern of the previous games can be avoided. That pattern is great hopes for tourism revenue when a city is awarded the games, dashed by the mushrooming cost of preparations and citizens irritated with disruption during the games, which then leave behind expensive white elephant stadiums. With political turmoil surrounding the Paris Games, we can only keep our fingers crossed that arson attacks are the worst outbreaks of violence. If the French pull it off, we will all sigh in relief and will not only owe a debt of gratitude to the French host, but will surely be able to learn from them. Let's hope for a safe and successful games, and thank you, Greg, for those insights. And speaking of the Olympics, who watched that opening ceremony? The opening ceremony of the 2024 Olympic Games was bold, original, and unique. On July 26, 2024, Paris offered an opening ceremony that will be remembered as one of the most memorable moments in Olympic history. The ceremony was open to as many people as possible. 80 screens were strategically placed among the crowds to allow everyone to enjoy the magical atmosphere throughout the French capital. It was the largest opening ceremony in Games history, open to all residents of Paris and visitors from all over the world. For the first time, the opening ceremony had broke out of a stadium and took over the heart of Paris. Hundreds of thousands of people gathered along the Seine to witness this grand spectacle. The parade of athletes was held on the Seine with boats for each national delegation. These boats were equipped with cameras to allow viewers to see athletes up close. The 10,500 athletes wound their way from east to west, ending their 6-kilometer route at the Trocadero, where the final shows and remaining elements of the Olympic protocol took place. Amazing opening ceremony, though, because Lady Gaga opened the artistic part of the ceremony with a nod to French music hall. She performed on a staircase resembling the Grand Palais. Gaga's performance highlighted the influence of French culture worldwide, showing the connection between eras and icons. And at the actual Grand Palais, opera singer Axel St. Criel performed in a blue, blanc, and rouge dress, and this powerful performance united French spectators in song. Near the National Assembly, statues of iconic French women emerged, honoring their contributions and celebrating all women. The de Billy footbridge became a grand banquet and fashion show, transforming into a dance floor with DJ Barbara Butch. The final 69 delegations were welcomed, and Team France received a triumphant entry embodying the spirit of the Games and with unwavering support and celebration. Then there was a rider on a metal horse draped in the Olympic flag, which rode down the Seine, and this symbolic act spread the spirit of Olympism, marked by peace and solidarity. The rider's journey ended at the Trocadero, where the Olympic flag was magically hoisted, accompanied by flags of the 205 national Olympic committees. Tony Estanguet shared France's century-long love story with the Games from a podium shaped like the Eiffel Tower. Welcoming the world, he highlighted France's dedication to hosting and its capability to unite for monumental moments. Athletes were celebrated for embodying the best of humanity. And as the last torchbearers arrived, the Eiffel Tower's beacon stopped, revealing Pierre de Coubertin's original Olympic rings design. The illuminated rings represented the unity of the continents and nations throughout Olympianism, marking a historic and symbolic moment for the Games. Marie-José Perec and Teddy Riner lit the Paris 2024 cauldron. Created by Matthew Leheneur, the cauldron's ring of fire, crowned with a hot air balloon, took to the skies, symbolizing the Olympic flame spirit. This flying cauldron will shine over Paris, landing daily for public viewing. And finally, we cannot forget Celine Dion returned to stage on the Eiffel Tower's balcony and performed a tribute to Edith Piaf. This emotional performance celebrated the timeless classic and the extraordinary careers of both singers, and Paris embodying the beauty and spirit. The Paris 2024 Olympics opening ceremony was a night to remember, filled with innovation, culture, and unity. Now it's time for those athletes to shine. And we can't forget about this week's Art Flash. Ever since the Stockholm Games in 1912, the Olympics Organizing Committee has commissioned a poster design that is meant to showcase the symbols of the host country and illustrates the spirit of what the composition represents. For Paris 2024, Ugo Gattoni, a French illustrator, was put to the challenge and made sure not to leave out any detail. His characteristic style, marked by fantasy surrealism, illustrates the complex yet vibrant spirit of the event. In keeping with the theme Games Wide Open, Gattoni, who has worked previously with French luxury fashion houses, produced a pair of complementary poster designs for the Olympics and Paralympics. This is the first time in Olympics history that two poster designs have ever been combined into one. And so, that's the scoop. But before we go, I have a special guest for you all. Welcome, Donish.
Hello. Hello, everyone. I just wanted to share some of my neat goodies from RIAT since we mentioned it on the scoop last week.
Amazing. That's super cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us. And oh my gosh, we can't forget about our scoop. This week's flavor is fudge brownie. Donish, do you want to do the honors?
Go ahead.
Yay. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you next week.